on the aerodynamic noise control via Bioinspired features. So I'm going to mainly talk about three different Bioinspired features and how they have been applied to the control of different type of noise problems. So just a little bit about myself first. So I have been a member of the Aerodynamic and Acoustic research team at Bristol University since the summer of 2018. And I'm currently working with a group of 8 PhD candidates and a couple of postdoctoral researchers. We are the Aeroacoustic team at Bristol. You probably have heard of us. So it's led by Professor Azapevan, and we have a team of about 20, 25 people working on different aeroacoustic problems now. But today I'm going to share some of the Bioinspired noise control topics here. So about my research interest. So I'm from a fundamental vortex dynamics background. So basically I studied low speed vortex rings, black body flows and jet flows before, prior to joining Bristol. And now my major interest is in aeroacoustics and mainly the development of technologies to control noise, because this is kind of a key step to ensure our public acceptance to adoption of all the new technologies, particularly these days we're talking about aviation innovation, mainly on urban air mobilities, and it requires a lot of efforts to make sure that we are basically able to control the noise or to keep the noise down to a level where it doesn't become a public health concern. And of course, to achieve this, I'm mainly involved in the experimental side, meaning that I'm mainly involved in the experimental testing and the development of advanced experimental techniques and tools. So just very quickly about the background. So why are we interested in Bioinspired features? Because it is firstly abundant in nature. So we can draw inspirations from a myriad or range of plants and animals, and they have been proven to work very effectively over the past 100,000 years. So these features are really useful or inspiring in terms of all different aspects of flow control, including noise control. So here are some of the examples. I'm not going to go through, but we have seen a lot of good and effective ways to control flow and control noise from Bioinspired features. For us, mainly in Bristol, we work on, I have to say 90% of the time, on a single animal called owls. So we derive a whole lot of different features from owl, the wing of the owl, including serrations, leading edge and trailing edge, including the Finglet treatment, which I'm going to mainly talk about shortly, and also any other corporates and rod and so feather features. So this is one of the primary creature or primary animal we're looking at to draw inspiration from. Before I'm going into that specific topic, I would like to just quickly show you what are the activities that we're doing at the Bristol. It mainly separates into noise generation mechanisms, basically understanding of the noise mitigation strategies, the study of noise control, as well as the advanced measurement techniques as mentioned. So there are a whole lot of measurement techniques that we are able to further develop to advance to help us better understand both noise generation and noise mitigation in our applications. And our basically tool or arsenal, if you may, is two aeroacoustic wind tunnels. The first one, it was built and commissioned back in 2017, 2018, and it became the National Aeroacoustic Wind Tunnel Facility, and it has been heavily used at the moment. So this wind tunnel is anechoic down to a frequency of 160 Hertz, and it has the capability of interchangeable nozzles, meaning that depending on the problem of interest that we are going to study, we can either make use of a letterbox nozzle, which goes up to a free stream velocity of 120 meters, or we can actually make use of a larger rectangular size nozzle, which is what we have used in most of the studies. The dimension is shown here is about 77 centimeters by 50 centimeters. So it's a relatively normal or medium-sized nozzle. And within the anechoic chamber, we have developed several techniques. For instance, we developed a Kevlar wall test session, basically suitable for airfoil trailing edge noise measurement. And we have developed beamforming arrays, which are able to capture noise frequency down to 400, 300 hertz. So these are basically the tools that we're going to use. Just quickly to jump into the second facility that we have recently commissioned. So this is a slightly larger aeroacoustic facility, but it's dedicated to propeller noise, or more or less dedicated to propeller noise, because it has a larger cross-section, and also it has a unique capability where it is able to suck the wake of the propellers gently out of the tunnel and balance the pressure afterwards from the top. So essentially, it's a pressure balanced or pressure neutral, as we call it, aeroacoustic tunnel. So we do look forward to more studies or results to share with you in the future. Right, so having said about our main facilities, I would like to quickly show you some of the tools or some of the techniques that we usually use to study a noise or study the near field. One of the primary ones is what we call an in situ sensor. So these in situ sensing units are miniature microphones or miniature dynamic transducers. They are embedded underneath the skin or underneath the surface of our model of interest. So what I'm showing here is a Nakadabo 12 airfoil, and it has been heavily instrumented along the streamwise direction with both dynamic transducers. These are the black ones, as well as the static pressure pods. I think there's the metallic ones. They are smaller than the transducers. So using these techniques, so the groups over at Bristol has kind of improved the frequency response or improved the way that we calibrate these sensors over the years. So now we are able to kind of, with confidence, say that we are able to quantify the wall pressure fluctuation and the near field relatively accurately with this type of techniques, and being able to map the entire near field flow field or the entire near field pressure fluctuations on the model of interest that we test. So this is one of primary tools, as I'm going to show you in shortly, that we use to understand how near field can be correlated to the far field noise. Right, apart from pressure measurements, we do also velocity measurements using the standard hot wire probes. So that provides us with a very high frequency response of velocity measurement, which can then be correlated with, so can be synchronized with the near field pressure measurement, and then can be correlated to a discern or to illustrate the near field flow structures. But apart from that, we also do make use of PIV measurements, although not as high frequency as we'd like to, but it is decent enough, as will be shown later, to kind of further help us to understand how the flow field has been altered by all these bio-inspired features as compared to the baseline. And this PIV systems is made up with usually, it's time resolved. So it's high speed up to 1000 Hertz, and is, and it's equipped with all the standard acquisition and post-processing modules. So, right, so let me go to the real, so-called the real discussion, the real results. I would like to discuss 3 types of noise control applications that we have studied. The first one is trailing edge noise control by Bioinspired Finglets. The second one is the vortex shedding suppression of alien tones, or the vortex shedding noise by vibrator cylinder. The last one is a wake airfoil, so a turbulence leading edge interaction noise control by leading edge durations. Let me go to the first one. So in here, we set out to kind of tackle the very first problem, or one of the most prominent noise sources usually in aviation, the trailing edge noise. So the trailing edge noise is usually generated by the turbulence eddies convecting past the solid trailing edge. And the scattering of the noise is, although it is quite difficult to measure, if you have ever measured it in the laboratory, it's quite difficult to measure in labs or in the acoustic tunnel, but it is quite loud in real engineering applications. So this is the very first part we set out to try to understand and suppress it. So the Finglet itself is derived from the down feather of the owl, which this is a microscopic kind of imaging showing the down feather structures. And from these structures, we derived, basically simplified the features and derived what we call a streamwise Finglet. So the streamwise Finglet consists of three parts. The first part is a tapered version, or a tapered leading edge. The leading edge follows the development of the boundary layer in the general power to -5/3. I think that's the general rule. And then consisting of a straight part, and it culminates as around the trailing edge. So essentially to avoid any spurious noise from the edge of the trailing of the Finglet. So this is the design, general concept of the design, and it is applied not flush at the trailing edge, because when we are studying it, we try to put the Finglets into different distances. So firstly, flush with the trailing edge, and then secondly, we gradually move our Finglet treatment upstream to see the effect of bringing it slightly further away from the trailing edge and how much it is able to further reduce trailing edge noise. As later, I'm going to show you that it is effective by bringing it a bit further upstream. Right, but before that, what we want to know is how Finglet act, or how effective is the Finglet applied on a zero pressure gradient boundary layer. So the first test case that we apply the Finglets onto a flat plate, and the flat plate is 1 meter long and is mounted flush to the nozzle exit of the nozzle exit lip. So it's here, so it's flushed. And then the flat plate is tripped with a sandpaper to ensure that, basically to ensure that the flow remains canonical over the entire flat plate. We did some boundary layer profile characterization first. So it does show that the profiles follow the standard canonical boundary layer development. And also the pressure coefficient is shown underneath. That basically shows, okay, the pressure coefficient does fall into the expected standard deviation of a zero pressure gradient boundary layer. So this is the first step to ensure that we are not adding additional impact, or we are not adding additional effects on the study of the Finglets. So to move on to the actual results, first of all, we perform a far-field noise measurement using beamforming arrays. The beamforming array does provide us with a knowledge of the far-field noise in a 1/3 octave band. So it doesn't show as the normal PSD spectral that you expect, but it's relatively more integrated. What the far-field noise measurement tells us is that indeed, the Finglet is effective in terms of suppressing or reducing trailing edge noise. Sorry, I probably should have explained here that H is the height of the Finglet. Let me go back. And S is the separation of the Finglet. So over here, we name our Finglet with the geometric profile of the Finglet. So H12 S6 L65 means that the Finglet is 12 millimeters in height, 6 millimeters in separation, and 65 millimeters in total length. This is somewhat decided by our boundary layer thickness. So the boundary layer is approximately 15 millimeters at the end of the flat plate. So about 0.7 to 0.8 of the boundary layer thickness is what we have chosen for our finglet to be. And this chosen parameter is able to yield us about 3.5 decibels of noise reduction for the trailing edge noise. And to further kind of examine the near field, so what has Finglet modified in terms of the near field pressure and velocity, we see that application of Finglet does basically change the behavior of the velocity close to the wall. First of all, it reduces the velocity fluctuations very close to the wall. So compared to the black line here, it does reduce the fluctuation very close to the wall. However, somehow it does increase the velocity fluctuations close to the outer layer of the boundary layer. So this is kind of the trade-off that we're observing. Yet, because the reduction over the near wall regions are more significant, we probably end up with this noise suppression or noise reduction. And also from the surface pressure fluctuations spectrum, we see that the finglets are able to, these are measurements at the trailing edge. So the finglets are able to reduce the wall pressure fluctuations by a good 5 to 10 dBs over a frequency range of from approximately 1,000 to 10,000, which is kind of in agreement with the far field noise measurement. So the maximum noise reduction we observe is over the frequency range from 1,000 Hertz to 3,000 Hertz. Over here, the far field noise is a bit clustered together because our basically our beamforming arrays will have problems about the side lobes. So essentially, there are some spurious noise being accounted for in the beamforming array. So then we actually set out for this question about, so can we actually identify or can we actually understand what is happening within the finglet itself that will lead to a reduction of the trailing edge noise, essentially the reduction of certain type of turbulence interactions happened within the boundary layer that will lead to the reduction of the surface pressure fluctuations and lead to the reduction of the velocity fluctuations. So we did a very comprehensive survey from the beginning, so leading edge of the finglet, all the way to the trailing edge of the finglet. And we do track the turbulence evolution of it. So this is a video for that. So as the flow impinges or as the flow convex past the finglet, we do see the evolution, the generation and evolution or convection of a turbulent structure that is following the contour of the finglet. This is partly we call finglet-induced turbulence. And on top of this turbulence that is basically over the ridge of the finglet, we also see some small or minor turbulence being generated very close to the wall, which is probably more clearer here. I'm going to continue playing. And so as the turbulent structures convect further downstream, we see that the structures are separated more further apart. However, it does show us that there are perhaps few different turbulent systems or turbulent eddies being formed, and they are interacting with the boundary layer. And as the turbulent structures convex further downstream, we see that they begin to interact among themselves as they are moving towards the trailing edge. So this is kind of a turbulence mixing or turbulence interaction actions that is directly as a result of the finglet-induced turbulence. Let me go to the next slide to explain myself clearer. So this is one of the pressure velocity correlation analysis that we performed at two locations. One at the middle of the finglet or close to the entrance of the finglet with a pressure sensor close to the middle of the finglet. So from here, we are able to discern two cross-correlation peaks these cross-correlation peaks corresponds to two different structures, which we have seen earlier. So one that is very close to the Finglet ridge. So that's the turbulent structures induced by the Finglet itself. And the other one that is close to the surface of the wall, which is also potentially due to the presence of the Finglet and its modification to the boundary layer structures close to the wall. So these are two distinct structures, and they are seen to sustain basically their so-called independence as they convected downstream. However, as these turbulent structures move out, so as they are moving past the Finglet and continue to convect downstream from the exit of the Finglet all the way to trailing edge of the flat plate, we see that these structures, this is the top view, we see that these structures start to merge. So the merging occurs not only from so-called the vertical distance, so not only between the outer and the inner layer of the boundary layer, but also between different Finglet units or Finglet cells. So this is something that we do see as a reasonable explanation or a reasonable development for the suppression or reduction of the wall pressure fluctuations at the trailing edge. Why? Because as these turbulent structures, the small turbulent structures, they mix and merge, the turbulent eddies or the small fluctuations will kind of become less or will be reduced. So let me just go back to recall this. So we have seen that for a Finglet wall pressure fluctuation at the trailing edge, we see that they do have maybe a slight increase over the low frequencies, but a drastic decrease over the high, mid, and high frequencies. This is essentially what our flow measurement and correlation is telling us. So the merging and mixing process does indeed help to suppress the fluctuations, and as a result, directly reduce the trailing edge noise. And now we see that, okay, so Finglet actually works for, works for zero pressure gradient cases, a flat plate, that is brilliant. But what if we apply to something that is more of a practical application? For instance, Nakada-Boltov airfoil. Sorry, I know that we have studied so much about Nakada-Boltov, but this is actually, the very first airfoil everyone tests. So when we apply the Finglet treatments to the trailing edge or close to the trailing edge of the Nakada-Boltov airfoil, we realize that it does indeed produce the same phenomenon. First of all, about the impact. So first of all, we have to quantify the impact of the Finglet on the aerodynamic performance. With reference to the pressure coefficient and the lift, we can safely say that the presence of Finglet does a very minimum modification to the pressure coefficients across the pressure and the suction side. So essentially, it doesn't really affect significantly the lift or generated by the airfoil. However, I have to stress, or I have to admit that through our studies, we realized that the drag is potentially something that will increase. So, well, this is kind of the compromise that we are getting by reducing the trailing edge noise, but getting so-called a bit of worse performance in terms of, I guess, CL over CD, so lift to drag ratio. However, if we're just coming back to the purpose of the study, we're looking at the far field noise reduction by applying the Finglets to a Nakada-Boltov airfoil. We do see that the effects are really close or similar to what has been demonstrated for the flat plate. So the noise reduction is indeed about 3 to 4 decibels, which is kind of significant for trailing edge noise because they are low in the first place. Also, the reduction, as again, similar or comparable to what we observed for flat plate, the reduction mainly occurs over the mid to high frequency range. So at low frequencies, you see some actually some noise increase with respect to that. But overall, if we integrate it as an overall sound pressure level, the reduction still outweighs the increase at low frequencies. So just to add on top of what I have mentioned, the physics seems to be somewhat really similar to the flat plate. So we are observing a system or two systems of turbulent structures, and they are interacting. So as confirmed by our flow measurements, we think that putting the Finglet slightly upstream of the trailing edge will be the most beneficial. And indeed, we did a parametric study of the Finglet locations with reference to trailing edge on the Nakada 12 F-well, and we find the optimal location for reducing trailing edge noise is approximately 0.9 chord. So we have to provide certain distance for the turbulence mixing or the turbulence merging action to take place. So this is the first study, and this study has been recently published in Journal of Fluid Mechanics. So feel free to, if you're interested, feel free to ask me for a copy. Thank you. And the second study is noise mitigation with vibrator cylinder. So this again is kind of a slightly different noise generation mechanism as compared to trailing edge noise. This is essentially a vortex shedding noise induced by the fluctuation of pressure over a black body. So over here, we have three cases. The first case is a circular cylinder, which acts as a baseline. And the second case is an elliptic cylinder, essentially somewhat similar in shape to our third candidate, which is the candidate of interest, the vibrator-shaped cylinders. So vibrator-shaped cylinder is derived from this nostril hair shapes of the harbor seal. So it's quite fascinating how how scientists have taken an interest into a small portion of the hair and realized that it actually has a very interesting kind of properties with respect to fluid mechanics. So these three cylinders are actually manufactured from 3D printing, and they are kind of painted with black because we need to kind of perform PIB measurements on that. And all three cylinders with a hydraulic diameter of 22 millimeters, and the ratio of major and minor axis are similar. So in terms of similar, I'm basically referring to as the major to minor axis ratio of the elliptic cylinder to that of the vibrator cylinder. And this is the experimental setup. Is kind of quite straightforward as compared to a Kevlar session, airflow test session, but it does provide us with a very good or a good access of the noise measurement. So the cylinder setup has been measured over a free stream velocity range of 10 to 30 meters per second with an interval of 5 meters per second. And the noise can be directly collected or directly measured by an overhead microphone array instead of a beamforming array. So this is quite a lot easier in terms of noise collection. And this is the result of the far-field sound pressure level of 3 different cylinders and compare with the background. I know it is quite close to the background for the vibrator, but here I'm mainly going to discuss about the effect of vortex shedding noise, which is over the region of 0.1 to 1 Strohan number. So we kind of say, all right, we take it as with a caution, but I think the noise measurement remains more or less valid over this range. So for circular cylinders, we do see a very prominent peak or tone as at the fundamental vortex shedding frequency, which is close to a stroke number of 0.2, and a second peak or first and second harmonics at different, of course, at 0.4 and 0.6. For elliptic, things becomes a little bit more interesting. It still has a tone, but the tone has shifted to a stroke number of 0.36. Essentially, if we take into account of the actual cross-section of the elliptic cylinder as seen by the incoming flow, it does corresponds to the right Schumann number. And for vibrator cylinder, a minor peak, we're saying a minor peak, which is somewhere here, can be seen at a Schumann number 0.27. But whether this will be actual vortex shedding or something that is slightly different, we'll see in the next few slides. But one simple conclusion that we can draw from here is that the vibrator cylinder does work effectively in terms of suppressing the tones, and it works actually quite beyond our expectation in the first measurement. So we repeated the measurement and try to confirm that, okay, so there's not really any prominent tones. And this is the far field directivity pattern. I'm going to just quickly go through that. So it doesn't really change between all three different cylinders, but again, it confirmed that vibrator cylinder does have a very effective way of suppressing the cylinder noise or vortex shedding noise across the entire polar angles. So from 35 degrees all the way to 130 degrees. And then we do perform a very comprehensive flow measurement as mentioned by particle image velocimetry. So we put it into the tunnel and then measure it with a 2D PIV system. This is the the kind of the flow field results, first order results that we obtained. In the wake, we see that the wake has become more or less suppressed for the vibrator cylinder as compared to the baseline. So the baseline is the circular cylinder. And furthermore, if we perform a proper orthogonal decomposition, basically a decomposition on the flow field in the wake, we see that the wake of the circular and elliptic cylinders can consist of a very high energy vortex shedding mode in the first two modes. But for the vibrator saddle and nodal planes, essentially the trough and the peak planes, we do see some form of dominant energy here, but not as well. So it's far less than the cylinder, circular and elliptic ones. So this is what we find out. So we set out to say, okay, so there are still some structured shedding perhaps, but are they really shedding? So if we perform a power spectral density, if we analyze the power spectral density of the temporal coefficients from the POD modes, we do see that the peaks corresponds very well for circular cylinders and for elliptic cylinders, but for vibrator cylinders, it looks more like a broadband than a peak. And further, so from the POD analysis, we see that, okay, so there could be or could not be a clear vortex shedding for vibrator cylinders. So what about if we do some cross-spatial correlation to see if the structures are really correlated between each other, as will be expected for shedding. So here we can see for circular cylinders, if we perform spatial correlation with reference to 0, 1, 2, and 3 cylinder diameters away downstream with the entire wake flow field, we see that the shedding is really organized. So they behave almost consistently throughout the spatial correlation maps. But for vibrator cylinders, it does show that, okay, so these structures does become much delayed. So instead of having immediately in the near wake of the cylinder, they do appear somewhat at further downstream. This is the first thing. And secondly, they become less organized. So instead of having, so regardless of the location of the reference, the circular ones are quite organized. But on the other hand, for vibrator cylinders, they become rather disorganized, or not really disorganized, but they become sporadic in that sense. So this is the spatial kind of behavior of the coherent structures behind vibrator cylinder. So this basically agrees with what we have seen, that they are not so correlated. So the structures doesn't seem to be a very regular shedding. And what about in temporal sense? So if we study the intermittency, or if we perform a short-time Fourier transform analysis on this wake, we see that for circular cylinder is a constant, is a really constant type of shedding, and the shedding consists of most of the energy. And for vibrator, it does vary really significantly over the measurement period, meaning that they do not have a constant frequency shedding. So instead, they do have large coherent structures, but in a very intermittent way. So if we look at the percentage, so the likelihood that we find a so-called shedding frequency, in here I have to use in inverted comma. So the shedding frequency for circular cylinder is, again, Stewart number 0.2, but for vibrator, it does spread across the entire spectrum. So this is as far as we can reach in terms of our PIV measurement sampling frequency, but I wouldn't be surprised that there will be further or higher frequency coherent structures. So from here, we say that, okay, so the reason why vibrator does so well in terms of controlling or suppressing the vortex shedding noise is because that it does not, first of all, in space, it delays the formation of coherent structures. Secondly, it does not produce a constant peak. So meaning that it does not produce a constant vortex shedding frequency. And lastly, this is going to be, I try to keep it quick. So lastly, it is a case that we studied some time ago on wake airflow noise control. So we have a tandem setup of two airfoils, so one in front of the other. And what we are interested in is a rotor stator type or stator rotor type of configuration where the wake of the front airfoil will impinge directly upon the leading edge of the second airfoil. And in this setup, what we have used is the trailing edge serrations as a way to control our wake shedded by the front airfoil and see if we are able to reduce the turbulence or wake impingement noise from the second. And this is the result. So we tested 3 different types of sawtooth or serrations, as you may. So the wide one, meaning that the wavelength is large. The sharp one, meaning that the wavelength is small. And of course, we did test a medium one, which was not shown here, but this is quite representative. So from the results, we've seen that the trailing edge serrations applied to the front airfoil does show a very good effect or very good impact in terms of controlling the turbulence impingement noise. So it does produce about 10 decibels across a frequency range of 200 all the way to about 500, and remains to be very effective up to about 1000, which is the typical frequency range that you expect on turbulence impinging noise. So again, the application of the serrations does really a good job in terms of suppressing the turbulence impinging or the leading edge turbulence noise. And just lastly, what we did, similar to what we did for the previous studies, we did instrument our airfoils at the rear airfoil across the streamwise directions. And we see that this is what we can observe. So with the serrated airfoils at the front, the wake is so much suppressed that the pressure fluctuations along especially along the leading edge of the rear airfoil does reduce by approximately the same amount, so by about 10 dB, which directly leads to the reduction of the turbulence impingement noise. Okay, so lastly, just a little bit more about what we are doing at the moment. So this part, the turbulence interaction noise control via leading edge porous is done by one of PhD Luke. This jet installation is done by our postdoc who has now joined staff run, Hassan, and we are also doing a few serrations on propeller noise because, as mentioned, we do have a second facility ready, and we are kind of gradually focusing more on propeller noise or novel propulsion noise. So prospective studies, I've kind of mentioned, explore different bioinspired features, improve our understanding through extensive flow and pressure measurements, and correlate these features with the far-field noise. So we're not, I think without understanding, a good understanding of the physics of what is happening, we are not able to really optimize our noise mitigation strategies. And of course, eventually we want to make full use of this large amount of database that we have collected over years and trying to make them into some kind of models that can either be neural network, which is hot at the moment, or some form of reduced order modeling that will better allow us to better design or better optimize our control strategies towards noise. So that's all for my presentation. Thank you.